At the end of last standard season, the red-black decks were very popular. Whether you were playing a lot of different things and just playing a general aggro, or you were going really heavy on the knights, either way, you were really getting some business done. Obviously, Theros comes out and people can't decide what cards to put in the deck list. So I messed around a little bit, came up with some stuff that works. Let's get into it. So, starting out, the base of the deck is going to be very similar. In the main deck, we're really only playing, I believe, 6 new cards in the list in its entirety. The reason being is there's not as many knights if you want to keep a knight's core, which is really the basis for this deck, because those are the best creatures to play in here. But the other cards we're adding do give the deck a little bit of extra, let's call it like a different dimension to play on. So for starters, we're still going to play 4 Fervent Champions. The card's still excellent. It still pumps all your other creatures when it attacks. It's able to equip cheaply. I mean, it's doing a lot of things this deck really likes. We decided to only go with 2 Gutter Bones. Now, previous lists played 4, but there were a lot of times you were sideboarding Gutter Bones out against stuff like the food decks and whatnot because it just can't punch through and it gets blocked by everything. And it's just not getting anything done. But it still serves to be a good one drop or even a card you can get back later in the game in those longer matchups. So I'm not a huge fan of the card, but I also don't hate it. It's kind of filling an in-between slot, oddly, for a one-drop creature. Of course, Knight of the Ebon Legion, still a great card. Still a good late game beater. It gets bonused up very easily and gets extra counters. So it obviously has to be part of the deck. Now, the first new card we come to is the Shadow Spear. And it's really good in this deck. Like, you do have some early turns where you can play it and equip for free onto a Fervent Champion, which is awesome. It's good against other aggro decks. Sometimes even just getting the +1/+1 is good because it allows a creature to get just big enough to get out of range. Especially if you put it on something like a Shadowfist Crusader, it actually makes it harder for the opponent to deal with, and you're gaining life in the process. There's also sometimes, too, you're seeing a lot of Thassa's, Klothys, Heliod's. This allows you to take shots at those creatures and kill them, whereas you wouldn't be able to otherwise. And also, don't overlook the fact that it also gives the creature trample. Giving trample to something like a Rotting Regisaur could be very huge. And then the next new card we're playing is Kroxa. Now, at one point, I actually had 3 Kroxas in this list, and I eventually scaled it back to 2. The reason being is you don't get nearly as many cards in the graveyard as you would think you would, and also you don't necessarily want the game to go long enough where you have 12 or 14 cards in your sideboard. So you're really only going to get to pull it out of the yard once. However, though, Kroxa does combo well with the Rotting Regisaur, which is really nice. It's also a big 6/6, and if you get your opponent below 10 life, I mean, you cast a Kroxa, you attack with it once or twice, and that usually ends the game on its own. It's also another card you can have when they sweep the board. You can play Kroxa out of the graveyard using all those creatures that just died. So there's a few gaps it's filling, which is really nice. And again, it gives you that extra late game play that the deck didn't necessarily have before. Still playing the Black Lance Paragon. It's used offensively when you need life. It's used defensively when you just need to kill a big creature. Not a surprise. Stormfist Crusader. Still playing a full set of these. And truthfully, this might be the best card in the deck. I know a lot of people look at this and think, like, really, that's the best card? But truthfully, it allowing you to draw extra cards and keep up your damage while also hitting the opponent every turn is really big for this deck. It may only seem like 1 point, but that really adds up over time. And if you have that on the board with a Rotting Regisaur, it also negates that downside quite a bit. So it gives you a lot of elements there. The Bone Crusher Giant, we're just playing 3, and it's really just to have another set of damage, set up situations where your opponent blocks and maybe you can kill their bigger creature. It's also another big beater that you can have later, which now benefits from Shadow Spear being in the list because it becomes harder to chump block, which is a really big deal. Only playing 2 Murderous Riders. However, I think an argument can be made that if you want to find space for a third one, it's not unreal. I wouldn't argue with it. I've considered it myself. We're playing a full set of Rotting Regisaurs, obviously because it's 3 mana, it's a 7/6, it's big. We empty our hands quite often, so rarely does it become a big problem. The last of the new cards in the main deck, though, Nightmare Shepard. This card, if you saw my top 10 list, it's one I really think you're going to see more of. The card does a lot for a lot of different decks. Here, it's replacing the spots that I would normally have Spawn of Mayhem in. And if you still favor Spawn of Mayhem, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. I may still go back to Spawn of Mayhem myself if the format changes up a little bit. However, here, this is giving us the ability to have a creature that lets us protect ourselves from board sweepers. And this is a big deal because not only are you getting the tokens back, though they're 1/1s, they all have the original abilities. So if they sweep your board, you may still be getting back a Stormfish Crusader, a Knight of Ebon Legion, and something, and that's still really big, especially when you have your opponent down low. Those damage bases keep rolling. It's also a 4/4 flyer for 4 mana, which is really nice. And then, of course, we're still going to go ahead and play full set of Embercleaves because why not, right? We want to finish the games quickly. Our land base is a little bit different than what we were playing in the previous versions. I've scaled back the tournament grounds to just 2, and that's because we do have stuff like Kroxa and the Nightmare Shepard, some things that you just have to have that second black or red mana for that unfortunately the tournament grounds isn't going to take care of. However, if you draw tournament grounds early, it does fill the gap of letting you play any of the creatures you really want on those first couple of turns, which is really nice. Also down to playing 1 Castle Locthwain, and that's also because sometimes you draw it alongside a mountain or you draw it alongside a tournament grounds and it doesn't really do what you want. And again, you don't necessarily want the game to go that long. Like, yes, it's awesome to have an option of that when those situations happen, but we don't want it all the time. Going into the sideboard, we actually kept this pretty simple. There's a lot of 2-ofs in this list, but they're all cards you expect. So Duress, we're going 3 deep. It's the only card in the sideboard we're playing 3 of. If Drill Bit's your thing, go with Drill Bit. Nothing wrong with that. I've just not had as much luck with Drill Bit. However, if the format tends to skew more creature heavy with some like weird combo-y creature based decks, more stuff with Thassa, blink effects, then maybe I go to Drill Bit so I can get those out of the opponent's hand. Otherwise, I think we're sticking with Duresses for now. 2 Empress Shellbreakers, mostly for the cat matchups to be able to get rid of the Witch's Oven, but there's occasionally other things you want to get rid of. Epic Downfall, still a good card. Several big creatures you can take down with it, so nothing wrong with that. Noxious Grasp, Legion's in, 2 each of those. 2 Angrass Rampage, which right now are place sitters where we're kind of experimenting with this slot. And I would mostly be using this card either against the slow control decks where they only have like the one thing attacking you, or against the Selesnya enchantments decks, because oftentimes you can get them down to 1 or 2 creatures, and then if you eliminate the one that doesn't have hexproof, this is your way to be able to kill the other thing. Don't know how it's going to work out, but it's something we're trying. And then I'm actually playing 2 Bedevils to kind of cap off the sideboard. And I like Bedevils because it's kind of a catch-all, in those matchups where you're not really sure which card you want. If it's a new deck that you haven't really seen, but the creatures are kind of problematic, this is another way to deal with those, and it's an instant speed answer, which we like. As far as overall strategy in the current metagame, I would say still play it the same as the version you played last season. It's still going to carry that weight a lot. The difference here now, though, is that Shadow Spear gives you a little bit of a different angle where you can combat those aggro decks a little bit more, and it becomes harder for your opponent to chump block your creatures. And then also having stuff like Kroxa and Nightmare Shepard make it to where you don't have to fear stuff like the Fires of Inventions decks as much, because sweepers don't have as big of an effect on you, and you still have something you can do after the fact. So there's a lot going on now with this version, but I really like it. I took it into the arena ladder recently, managed to go 4-1, and that was with a version that was slightly different than this one. This is kind of my updated version after that evening. So this is going to be still developing, but I think this is a really good base if you're trying to decide what to play and you like these colors. If you like this deck style, give it a go. I think it really has a chance to hold up in this format. I would expect to make some changes, plus or minus one or two cards here or there as the format rolls on. But overall, I think I'm definitely going to be playing a lot of this deck, but I think if you like this style of deck, this is going to be the one for you.